Hello, everyone. Welcome to Monday after another weekend of protests in the United States and now around the world. Another weekend of introspection about what equality is, what respect for human life is, what a police force is meant to be. Wow, are we asking hard questions or what? So it seems we're questioning everything, and that on the one side you have people willing to rethink institutions in a really big way, fundamental way, and others who want to keep those institutions as they have always been, almost certainly because they benefit from those institutions. So those are there's interesting discussions all around, and I don't know anybody who isn't passionately engaging in those discussions. That seems to be the feeling on the street. And I wanted to hit upon the Confederate statue issue because it seems to be quite the hot button topic. And hi from Sweden, hi from Cincinnati. Hello, Martin. Hi, Paula. Peace to you. So I posted my statement about Confederate statues in the United States. That it got more comments and more discussion. I didn't have time to engage because I was busy hanging out with my boy. But when I got back to the page, I was like, damn, this was a real intense discussion. And what a wonderful thing that we can do that we can have this back and forth about what monuments are supposed to be and what monuments are supposed to do in our society. And really start to rethink what it means to put a statue up in a town square, in a city center, something that is so quotidian, so part of everyday life, so normalized that it just becomes part of the fabric of your world, and yet is so much about a throwdown of authoritarian power so everybody knows where everybody fits. And those who are on the winning side of that authoritarian power balance love the throwdown of authoritarianism in statue form. It works for them. It makes them feel safe. It makes them feel in control. It makes them feel like their legacy is supported and this is the way it needs to be. And those who are on the other side of that authoritarian balance, who feel exploited and condemned to live a life of penury, servitude to those who are the haves, have a very different relationship to these monuments. And the monuments that give some people peace and calm and control give other people fear and tension and anxiety and heart palpitations when they see them, or deep rage and great anger, as we have seen. For instance, in Bristol, they just took down a statue of a slave owner and dumped it into the river. That was intense, right? And then you have Egyptologist Sarah Parkak on Twitter giving instructions for how to take down monuments like this, and people engaging in the ethics of that kind of instruction, detailed instruction for destruction. And I find it really interesting that then people, in the same way that when people say Black Lives Matter, people who are on the winning side of the authoritarian system say all lives matter. And so when we've had discussions about this on my page and elsewhere, and I know everyone's having discussions about this, what that means, the monuments are the same. So when people say, we're going to take down this monument of Robert E. Lee, this Confederate leader, this man who fought to keep slavery, then on the other side of the equation, you get the same argument, same exact argument is made, then we take down all of the statues. We're going to take down the statues of Jefferson. We're going to take down because he was a slave owner. We're going to take down the statues of Washington because he was a slave owner. We're going to take down Monticello. We're going to take down Mount Vernon. We're going to take down the pyramids because they were built by slaves. That's been the latest all lives matter sort of discussion, which is very interesting. This is a similar argumentation that we see by those in authority saying slippery slope. How can we? No, we can't. And so the let me hit the pyramids discussion. So many of you on this page, many of you watching, know that pyramids were not built by slaves. So, and I've seen this in all of the Twitter accounts and Facebook, and people who are Egyptologists who are out there in the public eye are saying, but pyramids weren't built by slaves. It's completely different. How dare you? No, no, no. Pyramids were built by a drafted labor force, an Egyptian drafted labor force, run by a skilled labor force that was very well treated, the skilled labor force, and then the unskilled labor force was fed bread and beer and put into different groups named after the king in some manner, shape, or form. But let me be very clear. Just because the pyramids were not built by slaves, in my opinion, does not mean that they are not monuments to authoritarianism and to great authoritarian power. They are. And the pyramid, for some people in Egypt who are on the right side of authoritarianism, would have filled them with feelings of calm and control, and that's my Pharaoh, and yay me, I work for him. And for other people who witnessed it, would have felt terror and fear of doing something wrong in this institution, would have understood their place as being very small in relation to this king. These monuments are doing the same thing. And thus it is no surprise that when the Jim Crow laws came around after slavery was abolished, you have those generations that go by, and then in the turn of the century, in the 1900s into the 1920s, people started to put up these monuments in Southern American towns. They did so to maintain an authoritarianism that had been lost. And it is no surprise to me, as I have said before, that they use Egyptian monuments to do so, that they use obelisks and other symbols of authoritarianism. So what's the difference, you may ask? Why don't we tear down the pyramids? Why don't we tear down statues of Ramses? Well, a lot of statues of Ramses have been torn down, arguably, by people who felt oppressed or that there was some issue with this kind of kingship. Many faces of kings have been smashed by people who felt too oppressed by that authoritarianism. The only thing that's different is here's what I'm trying to say. The only thing that's different between a statue of Ramses II and a statue of Robert E. Lee is the passage of time. And maybe that, well, Ramses II's art is just as crappy as the Daughters of the Confederacy Northern made assembly line plop art that people were putting out in 1920s to create a Jim Crow authoritarianism in a city square. So what's the difference? Just the passage of time, just the lack of embeddedness in a system, just the lack of understanding of the zeitgeist. But otherwise, it's exactly the same. So you may be asking me, what do I think about throwing statues into rivers? Well, there I think it's probably going a bit too far, but we can fish it out after. Fish it out, put it someplace and say this statue was thrown into a river by protesters and put a picture of it, next to it and situate it in that way. These Confederate pieces, I don't need them utterly destroyed. I think keeping them up in city squares with all of the graffiti on them is kind of a cool idea. I love that. It's like going into Edfu Temple and looking at all of the faces of the kings who've had have been removed by chisels. And that's just what they were like when those places were turned into churches and mosques and other things. Destruction is a part of creation of monuments of power. We have to expect that. That is what happens, and that is what people do. So again, in the same way that when I talk about looting, I'm not condoning it. I'm not saying, yay, everybody go out and loot. It's great. I am, as a historian, saying, why do people do it? What drives them to do it? What can we learn from that? When people go after a statue and destroy it and mark it and tear it down and throw it into a river, I'm not condoning it, but I'm asking what that means, what that says. What might fill us with horror if something is done to a pyramid or an obelisk that is thousands of years old does not right now fill some of us with horror when a statue of Robert E. Lee is defaced. But other people who are embedded in that power structure are horrified. And for them, it is a knife to the heart. It is this horrific takedown of an institutional power that they once had. So never discount how emotional these things are. I think I think the frivolity with which some academics have approached this is a bit much. I think it's important to feel the emotional connection that people have to these things on either side of the debate and discuss what that means and listen to everybody. It's not that just because you are in the institution of power that you don't deserve to be listened to in this time period of revolution. Everyone deserves to be listened to. That doesn't mean that these things get to stay as they were in that town square as a sentinel of the power and authoritarianism that was. They have to come down in some way. They have to be disempowered. They have to be emasculated in some way. And they have been used as tools of power in a cruel way. And just because I'm an Egyptologist, I don't want you to think that I drink the Kool-Aid and think, oh, but not my stuff. Oh, no, not that stuff. I think that a statue of Ramses II, like those carved into the live rock at the cliffs of Abu Simbel near the Second Cataract, filled some soldiers with a great pride to be working for this authoritarian leader, but they also knew their place. And filled others, particularly that Nubian population whose world was regularly turned into a hellscape by the ancient Egyptians, knew exactly what those statues meant, and they had a very different perspective of that material. And for many Nubians, blowing it up would not have been enough if that was possible in the ancient world. So emotions are high with this stuff, but it's, you know, it which makes me think of something like the Berlin Wall, right? There's not hardly a trace of the Berlin Wall with all of its beautiful art and all of its anti-authoritarian screeds scrawled all over it left in Berlin today. It's almost all completely gone because for them in Berlin to have that scar running through the center of the city, it was too much. It's something that they can't have in that city any longer. And so you can go down Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles and see a sizable portion of the Berlin Wall set up across from LACMA, LA County Museum of Art, and there you can see it. You can see it one step removed. You can see it away from its crucible of authoritarian creation. And there it can be kept. It's kind of like when somebody does something that's considered by almost all in the community as abhorrent, that you have to take that person for their trial out of that community and relocate the trial. You have to put it in a different city where you can get a jury of peers who don't know what's happened because the emotions are so hot and everyone's so freaked out that you have to move that discussion to cooler heads. And that is what history does. And that's why I try to look at all of this stuff through the lens of ancient Egypt, because I'm not a Ramessid Egyptian. And I don't get really mad at Ramses XI and what he did to my people because that happened 3,000 years ago. So it's not hot for me. I can look at it with some semblance of sobriety and non-emotionality, disconnection. And we can't do that right now with Confederate statues, even if you're living in Cincinnati. But if you're living in New Orleans or you're living in Richmond, it's much hotter than any of us can possibly imagine. So we're all having this conversation, but very few of us have an ability right now to disconnect ourselves from any of the emotionality. And so what I saw in the Facebook discussion from the last couple of days was very hot rhetoric and strong emotions on either side, lots of passion. And it's so hard for us to see that which we are embedded in. It is so much easier for us to see something that is thousands of years beyond. And yet, the power of these monuments is extraordinary. They are almost always a human form. They're not a human form, they're an obelisk or a pyramid. They seem something that's a miracle, that is so extraordinary in its production and its size and its perfection that it's almost as if they were built by non-human hands. And thus you have these ideas that aliens built the pyramids. We don't know how obelisks were set up, whatever. That their power still works upon us, even thousands of years in the future. They have a permanence to them. Their size and monumentality work upon our simple human brains. And the idea that, we can think maybe in terms of a couple years. Humans are very short-term thinkers. I think we've established this quite well in terms of discussions of human-induced climate change. We don't like to think in long terms. We like to think in short terms. We better get there soon or it's all going to be over. But anyway, if we're short-term thinkers, putting up a monument made of metal or stone that is there as long as you can remember, as long as your father could remember, as long as his father could remember, then that patriarchal authoritarianism, it becomes a part of your bones and you capitulate to it. You bow down to it. You assume this is the way it is always meant to be, that monument will be there forever, and thus that institution will be there forever. And that is why there is such a hard-fought battle on the other side to keep those monuments in place. And arguments are being put forth that, well, you're taking the history, and how dare you take the history of these monuments? If you remove these monuments, then we can erase history, so that's what you want? And then the other side, they say, well, no, you can have the history. We don't need a monument. You don't need a statue of Hitler to understand what his regime did to people. Some people then say, how dare you compare this to Hitler? And there I'm going to go, well, yeah, I think we can compare the enforced slavery of millions of people to the work camps and death camps of Hitler. I think you can compare these things. But it's because so many of us in the United States have benefited so directly from these racist, exploitative systems, we're like, oh no, that's a bridge too far. We can't. And it's so interesting to see, and maybe some of you are watching this right now, but so many of the same, and I'm going to stereotype right now, and you can hit back if you like. This will be interesting. But so many of the same white men who get obsessed with watching the History Channel and all of those Hitler documentaries, I grew up with my dad, obviously a white man, always had the History Channel on it. And we would always joke, it's like, oh, what Hitler documentary is on now, Dad? Okay, what are you learning about now? This is partly why I have my love of history, right? Because my dad was always reading about it and talking about it and watching it. But there is this interesting white male American interest in World War II history, because it is a history in which the authoritarianism of the white culture is glorified. And it is a history in which we can talk about removing the ultimate evil from the earth and having won. And we can talk about D-Day and all this strategy and look at what we did and look at what we removed and look at the death camps that we destroyed and look at what we revealed about humanity and never again. And so many of the people that belong to that same subculture, that same stereotype of the white glorification of authoritarianism, American exceptionalism, what we have given to the world, many of those same people are on my Facebook pages saying, but history, okay, then I'm going to take down all the statues of Ramses then. How do you like that? And it's this interesting pushback that, well, no, you can't compare me to Hitler. Well, we can all be Hitler, is my point, is that every society based on authoritarianism, on power, on police brutality, that's another discussion for another day, huh? Maybe I'll write that down and give you some thoughts about that. That we don't want to be associated with the Hitlers of the world or the Stalins of the world or the Leopolds of the world. That statue is under attack in Belgium. And yet it is time for the United States to really take into their bones exactly what it means to have created a country based on chattel slavery, in which the Senate itself is an absolute winning institution for slavery, in which a state like North Carolina gets as much representation as freaking California or New York. That's extraordinary, and that is a direct result of protecting the institution of slavery. And the Electoral College itself and counting states in certain ways is a direct result of that institution of slavery. In the same way that Germans, because the exposure of their authoritarian regime was so deep and so stark and no one could look away, Germans have taken into their bones and bodies, and I was an exchange student for a year, and I was struck by this at the age of 16 and 17, how much an entire community has embraced what a community can do wrong and said, we can do better, we must do better. And they teach about it, they talk about it, they think about it, they don't overlook it. They don't have statues of Hitler up in Germany, as so many people have put up on my Facebook, right? They have a different way of going about this difficult past. I'm not saying that, oh, look at you, you're so bad, you had a difficult past, you did it, you white man in North Carolina. No, I'm saying that we all have a part to play in this, and we can all look at the system that we all have to now, of which we have, if we're white people in the United States, that we have benefited from. And it's time now to see what the United States is actually built upon. It is built upon chattel slavery. It is built on the exploitation and theft of land from a Native American population. And it is based on white power. And it's time to see it. And it's time to talk about it. And we're doing it. And it's crazy cool. And from a historical perspective and studying as an art historian, the art and architecture of ancient Egypt and its ability to continue to work on our minds today, it all fits. It all comes full circle. It's extraordinary. So for those of you that say, well, then we should just tear down the statues of Ramses II, I think that you are completely on point. I don't think that the statues of Ramses II should continue to be used in the ways that Jim Crow statues of Robert E. Lee are used, and yet they are in Egypt. To this day, there are statues of kings moved to certain places to support the current president. There is an obelisk that is now being moved to Tahrir Square to support the current president. So those statues, though I say that it's thousands of years removed and we don't feel it in our gut, well, I guarantee you Egyptians walking around with the government that they have in Cairo and Egypt right now, they feel it. They know what those statues were meant to do and are still doing to this day. That's a big point that I'm making. So I will drop it there. I'll read your comments and see what you guys have to say. But these are interesting times. Don't look away. The Buddhists say that when you make a mistake, that you shouldn't shame yourself, but you should instead engage in an interested regret. Feel regret, and you look at the situation with a curiosity, trying to figure out, well, why did I do that? What is that? What is going on here? That's all I think we need to be doing as Americans, as citizens of this earth, looking at everything with an intense curiosity, trying not to be too defensive, trying not to take things too personally, trying to see things from the other side, trying to, when you see somebody from the side that you abhor, to try to understand why they feel that way. And given that they feel that way, how you might connect with them better to see it in a different way. The last thing I'm going to say is that you guys have seen me on the public Facebook a lot, I think, connecting with people with whom I do not agree, trying to get them to see things from a different perspective, trying to see things from their perspective. And I think that all of us need to do a better job of connecting with empathy to other people instead of ridiculing, isolating, making people feel stupid. It was an amazing thing when I was able to connect with people in the last couple of days, and 3 people were like, oh, why didn't you just say that at the beginning? I didn't see it that way, but now I do. And I was like, and there's the educator in me that's like, not that I'm trying to get everyone to see my point of view, but that this dialogue we are having is, though you don't see it, opening people's eyes and getting people to see things in a different way. And that is freaking beautiful. So keep talking, keep discussing, keep looking, and I'll be back for another discussion in time. Take care, you guys.